welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride, and I'm joined today by two excellent guests. Firstly, from the Common Wheel, Dr. Craig DL. Craig, how are you doing today?
Hi there, I'm doing well. Yourself?
I'm very well, thank you. And on the other side, we have writer and academic Effie Samara. Effie, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you, Kenny.
And we would like to thank Effie, especially for stepping in at the last minute. We had been hoping to have Ellen Höfer on the show today. A lot of our regular viewers will know Ellen well. Ellen has had a bereavement in the family this morning, so we do send her our very best wishes on that. It's very sad news, but obviously she wasn't able to be on the show today. So we start, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. These statistics obviously are from yesterday. Today's statistics will be published in a couple of hours from now. But yesterday there were 16 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland. Once again, there were, though, no new reported deaths. A total of 390,775 people in Scotland have now been tested. Of those, 371,825 were negative, 18,950 tests were positive. Last night there were 261 people in hospital, 3 of whom were in intensive care. And under the measure of people who died in hospital with a positive test, the total number of deaths remains at 2,491. So obviously a good chunk of those cases, again, still from that outbreak in Aberdeen. So especially if you're up in the northeast, we do encourage you to keep an eye on yourself, keep an eye on your symptoms. If you are showing symptoms, please do book a test as quickly as you can. And obviously, keep an eye on yourself, keep the masks on when we're out and about. Make sure you're social distancing, you're not being an idiot if you're going to the pub or whatever. We do want to get those numbers of new confirmed cases right back down again as quickly as we can. But we start today with a discussion that we started, Effie, with you on Friday after we spoke to the First Minister at her briefing on Friday. We asked about the contribution that Benny Higgins has made to the plan to build back better from this coronavirus pandemic. He had said that Friends of the Earth were ideological zealots who would wreck the economy for their narrow goals. First Minister obviously was not willing to come out and slam Benny Higgins for what he had said, but she did stress that other organisations, other civic society organisations were important and would feed into the process. So Craig, we did mention, I did mention in that question that Common Wheel had, and you personally in fact, had criticised Benny Higgins for what he had to say. What did you think of what the First Minister had to say in response to our question there?
Yeah, it's fair to say that I was not gentle in my language when I wrote about this on Source on the other day. On the First Minister's response, it was good to see that she had actually now acknowledged the role that Common Wheel has played in some government policies, particularly the National Investment Bank. But I don't think that she's really quite getting to the heart of where that ideological zealot comment goes. I mean, Scotland prided itself as being one of the first countries in the world to declare formally a climate emergency. But when you make that statement, when you say that there is an emergency happening, that implies that you are willing to take emergency actions to resolve it. So to then see the likes of Benny Higgins say that the environmental stuff isn't as important as growing the economy, it's really disheartening. It really undermines a lot of the effort that a lot of groups, not just Friends of the Earth, not just Common Wheel, not just the Wellbeing Economic Alliance, have done to try and push the solutions that we actually need to solve this climate emergency.
Mm-hmm. And Effie, today, or rather in the last, I think it was yesterday, Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, launched her election campaign. They have an election coming up fairly shortly. And she stressed in her speech, again, this focus on jobs and economic growth. Now, New Zealand is considered one of the kind of paragons of well-being economics. They're part of the Wellbeing Governments Alliance with Scotland, Iceland, And yet again, we still see this focus on economic growth as being a primary of primary importance. There was actually relatively little said in her launch speech about environmental issues. Do you think this is just something that politicians are kind of locked into, and that it's quite difficult in the environment that we have the political environment, I should say, that we have, for politicians to come out and say, no, actually, economic growth isn't the most important thing. There are far more important things we need to focus on.
I do. I can hardly think of a country which openly and officially will come out and say economic growth is no concern to us. Now, what you would hope for, I think, at this stage of where we are conceptually and ideologically and politically on the planet, is for enough people in power to be thinking this privately. That would be my hope. And I think, in fact, I know that people like Nicola Sturgeon and Jacinda Ardern, also, let's not forget Emmanuel Macron, who keeps on, every time he brings up politics, whatever his politics may be, does bring up his environmental concerns. And other people from smaller countries, so let us not forget that they have this thought privately, and it's very present in their system in their structure of thought. Now that's a big leap from where we were, say, 10 or 15 years ago. And that's to do with, activism, science, the research that's been done, and also how open people are politically to accepting this. So I think what you got from Nicola the other day, and I'm absolutely not defending either side here, or what my position is in regards to well-being, how important that is. Whatever her position is politically, and whatever she is politically prepared to implement or lobby for or push, I do not think that where we're at is the wider conceptual system where we found ourselves is ready to hear this in a cruder manner, if you want. So what she said to you in the second part of the question, to me, was an encouragement. And we know that in Scotland there is a lot of support for renewables and environmental policy. So let's see where we go from here.
Yeah, Craig, you've written quite a bit about how we can build the more resilient sort of well-being economy in Scotland. To what extent do you think, or rather, how do you think we can build the consensus in the country that is what's needed, and get past this political kind of straitjacket that prevents politicians from moving away from a focus on growth? Craig?
I mean, a good chunk of it, I think.
Okay. I was just asking how you think we can build the consensus in the country so that it is easier for politicians to say, we're not focusing on economic growth right now, we're focusing on bigger issues.
A good chunk of this is political inertia and the way in which we measure our economies. Just the fact of that measurement of GDP and GDP growth, and use that measure of strength and virility in the economy, word chosen very specifically. That does trammel. Whereas if we do think of how many more people are cycling, how increasing their health and other ways, find all the this GDP measurement. Yes. When people start to feel the tangible difference in their lives due to these new laws, I think that then will encourage things to go further and faster and harder.
And what do you think the chances are of that kind of thing happening, especially when we have an election coming up? There's obviously going to be a focus on independence in that election, and one of the key arguments that's always made against independence is how financially dependent Scotland is. Do you think there is just a kind of a blockage there where there has to be a demonstration from the SNP that Scotland is wealthy enough and is industrious enough to make independence work?
Only if you want to play by the same rules as the opposition imposes. You know, if you start looking at different ways of making Scotland better, and if you start using where the coronavirus pandemic has shown us the opportunities that can happen, the changes that can happen very quickly, in terms of redesigning our urban spaces to focus more on people and health and cars and traffic jams. So, yeah, by metrics and showing it of it, I think.
Sorry, we are having a wee bit of trouble with Craig's connection right now, so I'll just turn to Effie again. Effie, we have talked at length on this show for months and months about things like well-being economy, like the climate emergency. How close do you think we are to people in Scotland accepting that economic growth isn't going to be the be-all, end-all of how we proceed? Do you think the people are ready for this kind of change?
They already are in Scotland. I believe that they are in England. I'm not quite sure whether this would be a great encouragement to our viewers this morning, or in fact to yourself, Kenny. I think probably not. But we're doing a lot better. The problem is that people are, as Craig previously mentioned, are subject to the onslaught of news and influences that they receive from not simply a Twitter environment where we may be following each other, or a similar Facebook environment, or the same social groups. They are also exposed to outside influences. And there is an issue there where the outside influences are absolutely enormous in supporting this sort of destructive ultra-capitalist model of basically, environmental destruction and exponential growth. And because it's so marketed, so aggressively marketed at us, we find ourselves vulnerable to it, and it almost makes itself credible by its own personal growth. So it's everywhere out there. People are exposed to it. They see it all the time, and they end up believing it. Now, I will echo again, Craig, in saying that if in sufficient number of government bodies are able to come out and demonstrate to the wider public the tangible benefits of being open to other ways of living, then I believe in Scotland, particularly, Scots and ourselves as New Scots, will be more open to something like this. But you have the generational problem. You have people and I will not say that all of the people, because, for example, my dad's in his 80s and he's a very, very modern man. But some people tend to be a little bit more, obviously, set in their ways, or people, are used to making their daily living or whatever within that given system. So will they be prepared to consider different things? People can be frightened. And as we know, systems of power have a lot of power in ensuring that these people remain frightened. Now, it will be for the opposition, as it were, the environmental groups and the activists and the scientists, to make the case for non-growth-based economies.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned generational questions, and of course there has been another big generational question this week with the publication of SQA results. This has not been perhaps the Scottish Government's greatest moment. I think at best, Craig, we could say it's been a bit of a PR disaster. However you feel about the results themselves and how they've been produced. The Scottish Government and the SQA have not managed the publication of this information terribly well, have they?
Yeah, I think one of the problems is it's been managed as a PR from the start. This government has all but actually that the methodology they used would try and avoid disaster by creating a result that didn't look too out of line, despite a completely different way of doing things, without any examination of perhaps.
All right, we're having a wee bit
underlying the Scottish government.
We're having a wee bit of trouble with. We're having a wee bit of trouble with you again, Craig. I'm just going to see if we can get that sorted out. So I'll turn to Effie just now. Now, Effie, a number of the Scottish Government's fiercest critics have said that they have sacrificed students' grades for the credibility of the system. I wonder, what do you think to the idea that that credibility does credibility really matter? Is there an argument that if without credibility in the results, there would be nothing. The results wouldn't be any use to anybody.
Credibility does matter, but my humble opinion is that you should probably, instead of credibility, be aiming for true reflection of each individual person's worth as a student and as someone who's prepared to, either go to university, study, or whatever it is that their wish may be individually. And the problem is with systems like this, that you are not able to do that. There is a statistical approach to this system. I'm just, to be honest with you, Kenny, I think we should also look to England this morning, because we've just had the results from England as well. And for example, I'm just looking at a report here from the Sutton Trust, which is an educational charity that champions social mobility. And they are very, very worried again about the appeals, the fact that it's been announced that 84 days will have to lapse before appeals results will be ready. So university places will be compromised in England. Now, there needs to be a universal overhaul in this system. And as we discussed on Friday, my belief is that the problem here is the structure and not the PR. Now, the moment you position the PR ahead of the structure and the truth, that is where your headaches begin. The PR here is about producing statistical results, is about not upsetting the right-wing press in saying, oh, well, there's been a huge big leap from last year. What's been happening? Have people from deprived areas all of a sudden been enlightened? Or are you trying to ingratiate yourselves with certain postcodes or whatever? This should not be happening, but it's been happening, this classist system of, privileged groups, children doing well, is so embedded in our consciousness that we're actually having issues accepting that not all privileged kids are bright.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the issues in England and Wales. Now, there seems to be arguably even more marking down has happened there, and a more restricted appeals process. The SNP has kind of tried to fight back against some of these political attacks by saying, well, look how bad it is in England. Why are you attacking John Swinney and trying to have a vote of no confidence in him when you're not saying the same things about your own governments in England and Wales? Do you think those comparisons are fair? Is this just turning it into yet another party political spat, yet another, England's not as good as Scotland, so how things are in Scotland doesn't matter? Do you think that's a problem there?
Yes, it is a problem, and we should not be thinking in those terms. However, Kenny, let's not forget the reality of this. And the reality of this is that we are under a UK umbrella. So obviously, Scottish education has traditionally and historically been devolved. So there is a lot of room for maneuver. However, the room is still compromised by wider UK policy. So we must never forget this. However, we may wish to portray the fact that, Scotland would wish to be independent. And as you know, I'm very favourable to this independence. I support this movement. Practically, we are in the UK. So a little bit of a comparison, I don't think, as a reminder to people generally, I don't think is totally misplaced here. But there is a lot of room for maneuver, and it's not to say that it has not been acted on. As you know, within Glasgow University, where I am part of, there is the widening access initiative, and I have worked in that. So there are plenty of avenues in Scotland and plenty of ways of actioning social mobility at that early age. More needs to be done. The work will not be done easily. It's to do with people's embedded beliefs. It's to do also with a privileged class who do not like the idea that all of a sudden there's an emerging group who are about to encroach on what they're used to. So there's work to be done in reconciling those beliefs and in the practical pedagogy of administering a new, fairer system. Comparing with England all the time is not going to solve it. But yeah, we need to remind people of the reality of politics.
Yeah. Craig, I think we have you back now. So just that same question to you, really. What do you make of this this criticism of the Scottish government that by comparing it with England, they're just turning into another kind of Scotland versus England? We're marginally better than England, therefore they're kind of immune from criticism? Or do you think that the kind of hypocrisy of Tories and Labour, whose own governments in Wales and England are not doing much better, is something that deserves to be highlighted?
I mean, both points are valid. I do take the points that were raised just there about, there will be a certain comparison inevitable, but we should resist it. I mean, we should always bear in mind that better than England doesn't necessarily mean good. It's possible to fail and still be better than England. So we should be aware of that. We should try and address the problems as we see them, as we can control them.
And what space do you think this whole discussion opens up for a wider re-examination of how we do assessments? I mean, a lot of people have pointed out that a single exam is not a good way to assess people, and it's especially not helpful to people who can't afford tuition and exam preparation work. Do you think there is now space for that discussion to really kind of blossom?
Yeah, I mean, what we have seen here is we've changed the entire methodology of assessing pupil performance, and we've ended up with a radically different result from what was historically the case. And one conclusion from that is the new method is wrong and therefore needs to be adjusted. The other hypothesis could be that the old method is wrong and was disproportionately disadvantaging pupils, especially from disadvantaged backgrounds. So there does need to be that very serious, very hard look at all aspects of this, regardless of where it takes us and regardless of how many bad headlines it generates.
Well, we will obviously, I'm sure this story is not over by a long shot, so we will obviously keep talking about it as the weeks go by. But we move on now to another thing happening mostly on the south coast of England. We are apparently seeing what is being described as an invasion of refugees. So Effie, I'm going to come to you first on this. I know this work on exile is your kind of academic interest. What do you think of this rhetoric that we're hearing about an invasion of refugees? I mean, when was the last invading force you saw that came in dinghies without a penny to their names?
Nigel never fails to impress me with his inventiveness and his stupidity and his laziness when it comes to describing pregnant women and toddlers trying to access safety. Now, obviously, irony aside, Kenny, this is not obviously a new story. If I was going to say something, as you statistically, England has actually been the least helpful host, if you like, in this whole story of the last decade of what's been happening in the Middle East. As always, London is very good at creating wars, at opening up new war fronts, at ensuring that arms and arms deals reach the most vulnerable corners of our planet. But when it comes to the consequences of these actions, London is always the least prepared to accept the results and the tragedy that usually ensues. The rhetoric is, as we know, it's not bellicose, it's just lazy now. And whatever he's trying to Farage and his colleagues within the Tory party, whatever they're trying to incite, they are. I think their job is done. With Brexit and with the amalgamation of the far right and the fascist movement into the official Tory party. So ideologically, their work is done. So he's working Sundays now, Nigel, these days. I don't know why he's doing it. He doesn't need to. But people coming on, dinghies and people coming, trying to access safety and trying to paint these people as if being cunning and trying to exploit our amazing benefit system, which leaves indigenous English children hungry and things like that, I think completely defies logic. The rhetoric is fascist, is openly fascist. It was used logistically and politically by Goebbels and Goering during the Second World War. I could even point you to the academic sources that would verify this, but you don't need to go much further than Google to find this out. I will just end this by saying that it's sad that some people, not all people, some people are prepared to endorse this and not see the wider picture of why a mother, more than anyone, a pregnant woman with a toddler would actually endanger her toddler's life and her unborn child's life to access these waters. I think that is all you need to think about. And Nigel, again, I think he's given a huge amount, disproportionate amount of publicity for an unelected man, for a man who is known to have incited hatred and used Nazi iconography and Nazi ritual in elections, for a man who is known for his views, to be given official platforms by the BBC and Sky Television and what have you, is appalling. Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's quite all right. Craig, I'll come to you now while Effie gets her blood pressure back down. What do you make of this situation where again in the middle of this pandemic, there's a host of people facing all sorts of problems in Britain just now. And yet we're seeing, once again, the focus turned outward. We're seeing, those people out there are coming to get you. Is this just a distraction from what the problems are with how the people who are already here are treated?
I would say that if someone's sense of national fortitude is so fragile that it is threatened by people coming to this country as refugees, then they need to have a long, hard look at themselves. We were talking about a well-being economy earlier. For me, a well-being economy can be judged by the state of the weakest, most vulnerable member in that society and the level of care that the rest of society gives towards that person. So extend that to people who are trying to come here from the most desperate circumstances.
And what do you make of the kind of uproar that the UK government has had with saying, well, why isn't France doing its job? Why isn't France going to help? We need France to do more. And France is saying, well, no, you voted to leave the EU, so we don't do this kind of cooperation in the same way anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that's the consequence of the vote that was taken. And Britain needs to raise its own game to deal with those consequences. If it's not willing to do that, then maybe it should have another think about its path.
And Effie, just come back to you quickly. There's been talk about sending the Royal Navy into the Channel to gather these people up and send them back. Do you think, first of all, I mean, that the role of the armed that is any role for the armed forces, I guess this is, some people have pointed out, that this is theoretically illegal. This having military action against refugees would be, pretty much illegal and a pretty disgraceful action. Do you think this is, again, just a distraction, or do you think this is part of a change in the way the way that the armed forces are deployed by the British government?
The British government, according to international law, Kenny, have not really got much room for maneuver. This is another, as you say, a distraction and a desperate PR stunt. The Royal Navy, according to maritime law, are not empowered to enter international waters, or indeed French waters, as it were now, because we are no longer in the EU, without previous agreement. In fact, it would be, according to international maritime law, it would be an invasion of France. So it would be like a declaration of war. The idea that Priti Patel or whoever it is are using this lunatic sort of talk to energize their base, because that is all they're doing. They're just talking to their base. Is simply a joke. They cannot do it. The Royal Navy cannot simply be deployed and be commanded to do certain actions unless you are in a state of war. And in regards to refugees as well, there is the Geneva Conventions, United States Conventions, and directorates that we are signatories to. So again, they are not empowered simply to turn people away. You have to take yourself out of certain covenants of the United Nations, Article 51, and others, in order to be able to expel people.
Yeah.
And their safety. So you are not able to do that. You must listen to these people. You must receive them in safety and apply proper procedure. If you do not that, you will be in breach of the covenant and the convention. They know they cannot do it, but the Daily Mail readers and the Sun readers and some of the people who watch the BBC, they don't know that. And this is who they're talking to.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned there, obviously, a lot of the refugees that we have seen over the last decade or so have been from places like Syria, Iraq, and other parts of the Middle East. But we've seen another big crisis in the Middle East this week after the huge explosion in Beirut. Beirut, of course, has been at peace for some years and was actually kind of trying to build itself back again. But this has been a huge blow to Beirut. Well over 100 people dead, more than 5,000 injured, hundreds and hundreds of families made homeless. Clearly, there is potential for some of those to become refugees, but we're also, looking at a whole lot of other issues piling up in Lebanon. There's corruption, poor leadership. These are things that people have been protesting in the streets of Lebanon since October. Craig, what do we do about countries who are already facing, problems before the pandemic? Now the pandemic has come, it's another problem for them to deal with, and then some catastrophe happens like this explosion. We're bound to see over the course of the next year more, earthquakes, floods, fires, other things that are going to cause really crises in countries. How do we help countries that are facing these multiple huge problems all at once?
It does show that where a country might be able to cope with one crisis at a time, maybe two, when they start piling up and when they start cross-linking and affecting each other and affecting the response to each other, things become geometrically more difficult. How do we help? It's difficult. It's, as best we can is the trite answer, because for each country it's going to be a confluence of very specific events. But I do wonder if we maybe underestimate the chances of something like that happening here in Britain, where we know that we have rising civil problems. We have the coronavirus. We have a Brexit coming. We have weapons dumps in random places around the country, some in varying states of decay as well. What we're seeing in Lebanon, it's not inconceivable that you could see similar events happening here. I'm not saying it would play out exactly the same, but a confluence of different crises happening at the same time could leave Britain in a very fragile position as well.
Mm-hmm. And Effie, we've seen these, as I said, these protests started back in October. The Lebanon government doesn't seem to be responding very well. The president and the prime minister have been staying well out of the public eye this week. Do you think there is a responsibility for the West, organisations like the UN, like the EU, to take an interest in countries where there is real corruption, where there are problems like this, before it gets to the stage where some gigantic crisis like this explosion happen and it becomes an emergency aid situation?
It would definitely be something to consider. The issues here obviously are to do with institutionally, if you like, and procedurally, what the United Nations remits were designed to be at the time of its inception. And similarly with the EU, both institutions have developed and evolved hugely, obviously, since their inception, and it has been many decades. And we have seen this reflected in the protocols and if you like, the ideological inflection that both of these organizations have taken over the last 10 or 20 years. The problems here are political, Kenny, if you like. So the signatories to both organizations, so the United Nations was incepted as a peace organization, and it has acted in the past, but it has been reluctant to address and be blatant about certain breaches of the convention, if you like, if they were committed or begun by certain nations who are larger nations, notably the United States or the United Kingdom. They will be more reluctant to be critical openly, let alone create protocol and law for such things to be enacted and implemented. So, in terms of what can they do institutionally and legally, they cannot do much, but their clout is so enormous that they can actually begin to move in the right direction. Let's not forget, again, from the part of the EU, it was not designed for foreign policy, and this is something that it's started to do. In some cases, badly. I will say that as a big supporter of the EU and a European with all my heart and soul myself. But again, individually, countries have acted very honorably. So let us not forget Germany's initiative in taking in over 1 million people. Also, let's not forget Greece, who's been at the forefront of this thing geographically, and the way that they have dealt with, literally, there were times where they would open their doors and people will flood in, and they would not refuse anyone. Now, you will have photos of the Greek Navy trying to turn back a boat or what have you. But you also have 500,000 people in Greece present as a result of what's happened in the last 4 years who were not in Greece previously and have come from the Middle East. Some of them not looked after fantastically. Of course, I will admit that. But again, it's a small country. And you have, on the other hand, you have places like Hungary who have behaved appallingly. And Poland in their rhetoric and in their practice. So the will is there. And the good news, I think, is that even in places like Poland and Hungary, where these dictators are still hanging on, the new generations and the younger people are very much against this whole dictatorial approach. So we are moving, but we're moving slowly. We can do better.
Yeah. Well, speaking of countries with dictatorial governments, Europe's last dictator, the leader of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, is facing election today. Now, he's been in power for 25 years, and in theory, he has had election wins before. But as Stalin reportedly said, it's not necessarily who votes, it's who counts the votes. So, Craig, what do you think the chances are of these women who have kind of taken up the baton against Lukashenko? What do you think the chances are of them actually achieving victory today?
I would say probably it would be a bigger news story if they win than if they don't win. Belarus, I can't pretend to be an expert in what's going on the ground right now there, but it is quite interesting that Belarus has a constitution that in theory is very liberal and very open and should be able to facilitate this kind of election in a free and fair way. But the practice on the ground in the country is that the constitutional ideals are not upheld. That's maybe a warning to us in Scotland, where we had fascinating discussions about the constitution of an independent Scotland. You know, a constitution is a powerful and valuable thing, but it is only as powerful as a country's willingness to uphold it.
Yeah. And Effie, if I could come to you just quite quickly on this. These women have kind of taken up the charge after their husbands, who were also activists, have been jailed or silenced or kind of taken out of the equation. How important is it for these kind of challenges to great dictatorial power? How important is it that women are able to take a lead in these things?
Huge. Women have done miracles. As we know, we are particularly empowered in being able to negotiate our way out of dire situations. but also the other thing that has happened, and this is a direct result of patriarchal systems, is that women have also facilitated misogyny and authoritarian rule by siding and ingratiating themselves with the wrong groups. Women have given us the vote, universal suffrage. Women have, done amazing things both in science and in the humanities. So we can. Now, politically, this is an interesting question, Kenny, because politically, women can form and have been known to form very powerful groups and almost reinvent ideology from a different perspective, from a different perspective in regards to the materialist cultures that we've all been born into. It's the idea that they will group together and do what they're doing at the moment. I think it's of huge political significance. And I would like to see, obviously, as Craig said, it would be impressive and I think unlikely that today there will be a win. But simply in making that statement and coming together, that in itself is a huge big victory. But again, counting. You mentioned Stalin and that amazing quote. What matters is who's counting the vote, and that tells you all you need to know about today and about all bizarre electoral results, especially also in the United Kingdom that we've seen in the last couple of years. So electoral intervention, if you like, by powerful groups is also known to have been historically very, very valid. We need to guard against it. My belief is that women can play a huge role in this and we must never rest on our laurels.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do send out our solidarity to the Belarusian people. We will obviously be reporting on this more through the week as the results do come out. But we turn now to history, and today is the anniversary of the bombing of Nagasaki. This is the 75th anniversary of the action that ultimately ended the Second World War. This was described by one British newspaper today as the VJ Day celebrations, which is one way of looking at it. Obviously, it's good that the war ended, but the fact that it ended with two such horrifically violent acts, I think, should maybe make us pause when we think about celebrations. 75 years on, Craig, we're seeing the UK about to renew its nuclear arms. We're seeing the US, Russia, China talking about rearming. We're seeing North Korea and Iran trying to become nuclear states. Have we learned nothing?
It seems not, and it seems that the lessons from that horrific period are going to drift out of living memory without us having learned those lessons. I often think about the report that was written by Scottish CND a few years ago that modelled the impact of Britain firing Trident on an urban population and found that it could easily cause 5 million deaths. That is an act of absolute inhumanity, and even threatening to do so, as Theresa May infamously, gleefully did in the House of Commons a couple of years ago, is again just an act of monstrousness, and no democratically elected leader should be able to stand up and give a statement like that. So yeah, I fervently hope that Britain can change track and disarm. That's the only way that we can be safe from these weapons, as if we make a concerted effort to disarm and to protect each other from them by getting rid of them ourselves.
Yeah. Effie, when the Beirut explosion happened, a number of people compared it to the impact of nuclear weapons. Obviously, it came on the anniversary of the Hiroshima detonation. Do you think there is a will anywhere in the nuclear powers that exist to to actually think about disarming anytime soon?
Not today. I don't think there is. But I'll just to what Craig mentioned, and of course I echo his concerns and his viewpoint is what we should be aiming for, if you like. Modeling efficiency on Hiroshima, I think simply that just that statement, what he's just said just now, completely sends shudder. It should make most people's hearts just stop for a moment. It's a horrific example, if you like, or standard to be comparing yourself against and trying to be as efficient as Hiroshima. Hiroshima was collective murder. Obviously, the historical givens at the time were what they were, and let's maybe not get into that. My comment on this would come from not a pedagogical, but almost like an educational point of view. And let's not forget what makes people vulnerable to this sort of politics and what makes people support this sort of politics. The way we teach history in our schools and the way we celebrate the great achievements of countries is based on mainly war dates. So you take, for example, I know with my daughter, she will come home and say, oh, we've got to do this to celebrate X day. And she's a Scottish child educated in Scotland. We do this less in England, from what I know from family and obviously following their news and the curriculum there and what have you. But, and obviously their big celebrations and the big references are to do with World War II. Now, when you turn war, which is a horrific, it used to be a necessity, but we should be looking less to war now. When you turn this into rhetorically and educationally, when you turn this into a feat of glory and something worth celebrating, this is where your problem begins. And when you implant this in 5, 6, 7-year-old children, by the time they're young adults, they will have directed their consciousness towards recognizing achievement and equating achievement with, I will not say colonization, I will actually say an invasive spirit. So if you invade and come away victorious, i.e. loot, take, impose yourself, you're a victor, you're a winner. And this is why, moving on to, if you like, the latest rhetoric on coronavirus, you've heard a lot of the Anglospheric, the leaders from the Anglosphere, so Johnson, Trump, and people like that, talking about beating the virus and coming away victorious. Even given the lunacy of trying to beat a bacteria, which is airborne, it resonates with a lot of people and it energizes their consciousness. So nuclear weapons, albeit that they would actually be suicidal, they would kill more people probably here than they would anywhere else. This again resonates with people, and we need to look to how we educate our young people, especially up here in Scotland where we can, and maybe come away from these models of bellicosity.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we do send all wishes of peace and prosperity to the people of Japan. It's a scar on their society that I don't think will go away very quickly. So we do obviously send our best wishes there. But when we think about nuclear weapons in our own country, it is obviously one of the great motivating factors for people seeking independence that Scotland could get rid of the nuclear weapons that are cited here. And this week we saw Nicola Sturgeon say that a mandate for an independence referendum will absolutely definitely be in the 2021 manifesto, and that we've seen more and more talk from various SNP figures that an independence referendum is coming soon. So Craig, Do you think that there is going to be a mandate, and how do you think it will be received by our friends down south?
Well, without being too cynical, I think there's been a mandate for independence or for an independence referendum in virtually every SNP manifesto. It's how it is worded, how it is caveated that I'm really interested in seeing. So is that going to be a mandate that will result in an independence referendum before the end of the next parliament, for instance? And I'd be interested to see how they intend to do that. If it's going to be another case of, well, we'll ask for Section 30 again, and if Boris Johnson says no, we'll ask for Section 30 again, I'm not sure it'll take as much further forward than we already are. However, if we do have a plan to maybe create a bit more pressure on Westminster to accept the reality that independence is coming, then maybe that's something more exciting to work towards.
And you have written about how to apply that pressure. Do you want to just tell people quickly where they can find your thoughts on that?
Yeah, if you go onto the Commonweal website, commonweal.scot, go into our policy library. The paper is called Within Our Grasp. It was written in January 2020.
Brilliant. And Effie, just quickly from you, we've seen obviously a new Tory leader, Douglas Ross, installed. We've also seen George Galloway coming with his Alliance for Unity to supposedly lead the fight back against the Nats. Do you think either of these strong men can fight back and win Scotland back to the Union?
You know what? I'd like to see Galloway try, but I want to see him in a new costume, because I understand he owns a variety of theatrical apparel. So let's try that. The fact that they've had to deploy Galloway probably demonstrates a degree of frustration on their side, and a degree of perhaps even a Galloway in the bowler hat, the degree of desperation to an extent. Having said that, again, away from trying to sort of present this as a PR exercise, and it isn't. It is a constitutional question of the utmost importance, and it's to do with maybe 600 or 700 years of history and reality that the Scottish nation on Scottish soil, but also away from Scottish soil, because it's one of the largest emigrating nations in the world. The Scots are. So it is with the way that this goes in further into the 21st century. And we can go into the legalities of this and the constitutionality of it, and we can't do it. We've literally got a minute. The Sewell Convention expressly states that the Parliament in Westminster will not legislate in devolved matters where there is no consent from the Parliament in Holyrood. Now, the problem is that practically and politically, this was undergirded by the European Union's laws that supported local government and devolved administration. And they were designed so that local voices would not be suppressed. I will very quickly use the example of Wallonia in Belgium, who were able to veto the TIPP agreement, which America was very, very strongly lobbying in favor of. And they came along, a very, very small number of people within Belgium, and they stopped it. Now, the European Union expressly empowered smaller nations to do this. Coming away from the European Union, we have been talking about the power grab and the fact that constitutionally, the United Kingdom government will move towards suppressing these voices. And then a lot of work needs to be done in order to ensure a legal coming away from these structures. I am not pessimistic at all. I think that there is support at the moment in Scotland for independence. Every single poll that, comes back and it's showing in favor of well over 50% now. I do not believe it takes into account European votes, which are about 250,000 in this country, my dad included in those. So there's very, very good support. The question is how politically you impose this, because the continual refusals from London are political. They know they cannot go on refusing forever. I will support what Nicola said. Craig, obviously, how many mandates do we need? Yeah, good, valid question. Ideally, I wouldn't want to see another mandate. I would like to see a vote coming before Christmas. I don't think we're going to get one, but I don't think they're going to be able to hold out much longer if there is a clear intention from the Scottish electorate and enough of us turn up and actually vote. So please come and vote. Do vote. It's incredibly important. Each vote will count. They will not be able to resist this indefinitely. And there are other avenues, and perhaps we could talk about this in a future program. There are other avenues, legal avenues, constitutional avenues, even if they do attempt to refuse it after the May election. There are legal routes that can be taken quite safely and quite rapidly to declare independence.
Yeah, well, as you say, we will have to discuss that on another show because we are all out of time now. So thank you very much to Dr. Craig Dalzell and Effie Samarat for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have both of you. And thank you at home for joining us as well. We do have to ask now, if you are able to support us financially, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register, sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month helps us to keep doing what we do here at Broadcasting Scotland. If you're not able to support us financially, we do urge you, please, you can still help us. Follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, find us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the videos there, and then share the shows around. Let people know why you watch Broadcasting Scotland, what you get out of it. You're our biggest marketing tool that we have, and word of mouth is the best way to spread the word about these things. So do please let people know why you support Broadcasting Scotland. And finally, if you'd like to get involved here at Broadcasting Scotland, there are oodles of opportunities. So do please get in touch with us if you've got any interest in getting involved in broadcasting here, whether it's in front of the camera or behind. We can provide training and support to help you achieve whatever it is you want to achieve at Broadcasting Scotland. But that is absolutely all we have time for. Gordon will be back tomorrow at 7 with another Scotland at 7. I'll be back on Tuesday at the same time. But until then, thanks once again to Effie and to Craig and to you for joining us, and have a lovely Sunday. Goodbye.